You know what's funny? Not haha funny, more like oh shit funny. It's how people treat loners. Society's got this whole narrative going, right? That if someone's alone, they're broken. That if they're not constantly surrounded by people, posting every thought, tagging everyone in their goddamn breakfast photos, something must be wrong with them. And here's the kicker. People actually believe this garbage. They see someone comfortable in their own company and think, oh, perfect, an easy target. They assume silence means weakness. That independence means loneliness. That someone who doesn't need validation must be desperate for it. And that's where the trouble starts. Because what they don't realize, what they can't comprehend until it's way too late, is that they're not dealing with someone who's waiting to be saved. They're dealing with someone who already saved themselves, and you don't mess with that person. Not because they'll explode in your face, not because they'll seek revenge or burn your life down, but because once you cross them, they'll do something far more devastating. And here's the thing nobody tells you about that kind of loss. You don't realize what you had until the silence becomes permanent. So buckle up, because we're about to dive deep into the psychology of the person everyone underestimates, the loner who knows exactly who they are, what they deserve, and when to walk away. And if you've ever been that person, or if you've ever lost one, you already know where this is going. Let me paint you a picture. There's this person in your life, maybe a friend, maybe a partner, maybe a co-worker. They're low-key. They don't demand attention. They're not posting cryptic quotes at 2 a.m. or flooding your feed with their opinions. They show up when it matters. They listen. They're dependable. But they're also separate. Like they've got this inner world that doesn't revolve around anyone else. And to most people, that's weird, because we live in a world that equates visibility with value. If you're not constantly performing your existence, people assume you don't have one. So when someone's comfortable being invisible, when they don't chase validation or beg for attention, it triggers something in others. Curiosity, maybe, or suspicion, sometimes even contempt, and that's when the testing begins. Little boundary pushes, subtle digs disguised as jokes, the kind of disrespect that comes wrapped in plausible deniability. I was just kidding. You're too sensitive. Why are you making such a big deal out of nothing? And most people who need connection, who fear isolation, will fold. They'll laugh it off, swallow the disrespect, adjust their boundaries to keep the peace. But a loner who truly knows themselves, they won't. And that's when things get interesting. Here's what separates a true loner from someone who's just temporarily alone. A true loner doesn't define themselves through other people's eyes. Think about that for a second. Most people build their entire identity on external validation. Their worth is determined by how many friends they have, whether they're in a relationship, what people think of them, how liked they are. Their sense of self is a mirror, constantly reflecting back what others project onto them. So when someone withdraws affection, when they get the silent treatment, when they're excluded or compared unfavorably to someone else, it's devastating. Because without that external validation, they don't know who they are. But a loner who's done the inner work, who's spent time alone not out of necessity but out of choice, they're different. They've already answered the question, who am I when no one's watching? And once you've answered that question, manipulation loses its power. Silent treatment? Cool, they've got a great book to finish. Withdrawal of affection? No problem, they weren't performing for approval anyway. Social exclusion, honestly, kind of a relief. Less noise, more peace. Comparison to someone else? Good for them, they'll think, and mean it. Because here's the truth bomb that makes manipulators furious. You can't control someone who doesn't need you. And when people realize their usual tactics, guilt, pressure, withdrawal, comparison, aren't working, that's when they start to panic. Because the power dynamic they assumed existed doesn't. They thought they were dealing with someone desperate for connection. They were actually dealing with someone who knows the difference between wanting company and needing it. And that difference, it changes everything. Let me tell you what happens next. The person who's been testing boundaries, let's call them Alex because every group has an Alex, doubles down. The subtle disrespect gets a little less subtle. The jokes get a little sharper. The boundary pushing gets more aggressive. Because Alex operates on a simple principle. Everyone has a breaking point. Everyone will eventually react, defend themselves, fight back. And when they do, Alex wins, because now there's drama. Now there's a narrative. Now Alex can play the victim. I was just joking and they flipped out on me. But here's what Alex doesn't understand. The loner isn't going to flip out. They're not going to argue. They're not going to defend themselves. They're not going to give Alex the satisfaction of a reaction. They're just going to adjust, quietly, internally. They're making a calculation Alex can't see. Is this worth my peace? And the moment the answer becomes no, not in anger, not in hurt, but in simple, clear recognition, something shifts. The loner doesn't announce it, doesn't send a manifesto or demand an apology. They just start moving away. Responses get shorter. Availability decreases. Energy shifts elsewhere. And Alex doesn't even notice at first, because to Alex this is just another phase, another mood, another thing that'll blow over if they just wait it out. What Alex doesn't realize is that the loner isn't waiting for anything. They're not testing Alex. They're not trying to teach them a lesson. They've already made their decision. The relationship, as whatever it was, is over. Alex just doesn't know it yet. Now here's where things get really interesting, because a loner who knows themselves doesn't just have boundaries. They understand the nature of boundaries. They know that healthy relationships involve discomfort sometimes. Growth is uncomfortable. Honest conversations are uncomfortable. Vulnerability is uncomfortable, and they're okay with that. They can sit in the tension of a difficult conversation. They can handle someone being upset with them. They can navigate conflict without collapsing. But here's what they won't tolerate: disrespect. And they know the difference. Most people don't. Most people confuse the two. They let disrespect slide because they think it's just stress or a bad day or how they communicate. They make excuses. They didn't mean it that way. They're going through a lot right now. Everyone makes mistakes. And sure, all of that can be true. But a loner who's been through enough knows something crucial. Disrespect is a choice. You can be stressed without being cruel. You can be struggling without disrespecting someone's boundaries. You can make a mistake and actually own it instead of deflecting. So when someone makes a joke at their expense and doesn't apologize when asked, violates a clearly stated boundary just to see what happens, dismisses their feelings with, "You're too sensitive," pushes and pushes and pushes, waiting for them to break. The loner doesn't see stress or misunderstanding. They see disrespect. And once they see it, once they name it, the countdown begins. Because unlike most people, they don't need to be disrespected multiple times to recognize a pattern. Once is data, twice is confirmation, 3 times, they're already gone. Not loudly, not dramatically, but absolutely. And this is where the regret starts to creep in, because people think silence is a tactic. They think it's a way to get attention, a punishment that'll eventually end, a negotiation tool, a cry for help. So when the loner goes quiet, people wait it out. They'll come around, they think. They just need time to cool off. Days pass, then weeks. Messages go unanswered, calls go unreturned. And slowly, painfully, it starts to dawn on them. This isn't a fight, this isn't a phase. This is an ending. But here's the truly maddening part for the person left behind. There's no closure, no final confrontation, no dramatic exit speech, just absence. Because the loner learned something through their years of solitude, through all those hours of self-reflection. Explanations invite manipulation. The moment you explain why you're leaving, you open the door to negotiation. But I didn't mean it that way. I can change. Give me another chance. You're overreacting. And the loner knows that game. They've played it before. They've watched people promise change without changing. They've seen how explanations become weapons, so they don't explain. They don't justify. They don't defend their decision. They simply complete the relationship. No argument, no revenge, no public call-out, no dramatic social media post. Just a quiet, permanent withdrawal. And here's what makes it so brutal. You can't argue with absence. You can't manipulate someone who won't engage. You can't guilt-trip someone who's already at peace with their decision. The door isn't just closed. It never existed in the first place. Let's get real for a second about what's actually happening here. This isn't about being cold or heartless. This isn't about not caring. It's about self-preservation. See, loners, especially those who've been through trauma, betrayal, or repeated boundary violations, they've learned something most people never figure out. Not everyone deserves access to you. And maintaining boundaries isn't about punishing others. It's about protecting yourself. Think about it like this. If someone repeatedly proves they don't respect your boundaries, what are your options? Option A. Keep explaining, keep hoping they'll change, keep sacrificing your peace for a relationship that drains you. Option B. Accept who they are, accept that it's incompatible with what you need, and walk away. Most people choose option A because they're terrified of being alone, being seen as difficult, being misunderstood, being the bad guy. But a loner who truly knows themselves, they've already been alone. They've already been misunderstood. They've already survived being the bad guy in someone else's narrative. And they learned something crucial. Their peace matters more than someone else's comfort. So when they go silent, it's not punishment. It's self-care. They're not trying to hurt you. They're trying to protect themselves from continuing to be hurt. And once someone reaches that point, once they've weighed the relationship against their peace and chosen peace, there's no going back. Because they're not angry anymore. They're not hurt anymore. They're just done. And done is a place you can't negotiate from. Here's what happens in the aftermath. Life goes on. Months pass, maybe even years, and the person who pushed the loner away starts to notice things. They notice that new friendships feel shallow compared to what they had. Other people aren't as patient with their bullshit. The stability they took for granted was actually rare. Being understood without having to explain yourself was a gift they didn't appreciate. They start to see the loner's silence not as an overreaction, but as a boundary they should have respected in the first place. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, and they reach out. An apology, an explanation, a request for closure, or one more conversation. And you know what usually happens? Nothing. Because the loner has moved on, not out of spite, not to prove a point, but because they genuinely don't need that chapter reopened. They processed it, they learned from it. They're at peace. And reopening that door, even to talk things through, would disrupt that peace. So the message goes unanswered. And the person left behind is forced to sit with something incredibly uncomfortable. The consequences of their own actions. No dramatic confrontation to argue through. No villain to blame. No external enemy. Just the quiet, permanent absence of someone who decided they deserved better. Now here's the part that'll really mess with your head. This same pattern plays out over and over in society because we fundamentally misunderstand what strength looks like. We think strength is never backing down, always fighting back, winning every argument, never showing weakness. But that's not strength, that's ego. Real strength is knowing when to walk away. Real strength is choosing peace over being right. Real strength is saying, I deserve better than this without needing the other person to agree. And loners who've cultivated that kind of strength, they're dangerous to people who rely on manipulation and control. Because you can't guilt-trip someone who's okay with being alone. You can't gaslight someone who trusts their own perception of reality. You can't manipulate someone who doesn't need your validation. So when someone who's used to controlling others through emotional leverage encounters a person who's immune to it, they escalate, they push harder, test more boundaries, get more aggressive, because they can't believe someone won't break. And by the time they realize this person isn't playing the same game, that this person isn't playing a game at all, it's too late. The door is already closed. So let's circle back to the core truth here. A loner who knows these three things becomes immune to the social manipulation most people use to control others. First, they know who they are without you. Their identity isn't dependent on external validation. They've done the work to understand themselves. Their values, their boundaries, their worth, independent of whether anyone else recognizes it. Second, they know the difference between discomfort and disrespect. They can sit with tension. They can handle difficult conversations, but they won't tolerate being treated as less than they deserve. And they know the difference instantly. Third, they know silence is a final answer. They don't explain, justify, or defend their departure. They simply leave, and they don't come back. Together, these three realizations create something that terrifies manipulators. A person who can't be controlled. Not because they're aggressive or confrontational, but because they're complete. They don't need you to understand them. They don't even need you to like them. They're genuinely okay being alone. And once someone reaches that level of self-sufficiency, that level of inner peace, your leverage is gone. You can't threaten them with loneliness. They've been there. You can't threaten them with social exclusion. They're comfortable on the margins. You can't threaten them with withdrawal of affection. They don't need your affection to know their worth. So what power do you have left? None. And that's when people realize what they lost. Now, before we wrap this up, let's get one thing crystal clear. Don't mess with a loner isn't a threat. It's not about fear or intimidation or some dominance bullshit. It's a simple observation. If you treat someone with disrespect, they'll leave. And if they're the kind of person who's genuinely okay being alone, they won't warn you first. They won't beg you to treat them better. They won't create drama to get your attention. They'll just go, quietly, completely, permanently. And the tragedy is that it didn't have to be that way. Because here's the thing nobody wants to admit. Most of these situations are completely avoidable. If people just respected boundaries the first time, apologized when they crossed a line, treated others with basic human decency, recognized that access to someone's time and energy is a privilege, not a right, none of this would happen. The loner wouldn't leave. The relationship wouldn't end. The regret wouldn't settle in. But instead, people test, they push, they take for granted. And then they act shocked when someone who's been nothing but patient finally says, enough. If this resonated with you, if you saw yourself in these words or recognized a situation you've been through, share this with someone who needs to hear it. And leave a comment telling me, have you ever been the loner who walked away, or the person who realized too late what they lost? What happened? Because these conversations matter. And the more we talk about them, the more people understand. Access to someone is a privilege. Respect is the price. And silence is the consequence. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I'll see you in the next one, my friends. Peace.